I've always loved Halloween. When I was 10, it wasn't just another holiday, it was the day I looked forward to all year. Weeks before it even arrived, I'd already be sketching costume ideas, begging my parents for fake blood, and counting down the days until the decorations went up. My dad loved it just as much as I did. He'd go all out. Fake cobwebs, giant spiders, skeletons hanging from trees, even one of those fog machines that made the whole yard look haunted. That year felt special. My two best friends, James and Curlis, came over to help us decorate. James was 14, the cool older kid who could climb trees without breaking a sweat, and Curlis was 12, loud, funny, always teasing me for being the youngest. We spent the whole afternoon turning my front yard into something straight out of a horror movie. My dad was on the porch setting up a creepy scarecrow. I was draping cobwebs over the bushes with curls, and James was up on a small ladder hanging a plastic ghost from the big oak tree by the sidewalk. Everything felt perfect. The sun was setting, the fog machine hissed, and we were laughing about who'd get the most candy that night. That's when I saw him. A man I'd never seen before was walking down the street. He slowed down when he reached our house, then stopped, just stood there, watching us. He wasn't walking a dog, he wasn't on his phone, he wasn't even looking at the other houses, just ours. He looked completely ordinary, maybe late 30s, wearing a plain gray jacket and jeans, average in every way, except for his smile. It was wide, too wide, like it didn't fit his face. He looked right at me and said, "Wow, you guys are doing a great job. Getting ready for the big night?" I smiled back because I was a friendly kid. "Yeah, we're trying to be the spookiest house on the block." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning every corner of our yard. "I bet you'll get a lot of candy," he said. "You planning to go trick-or-treating around here? What's your route?" Something about that question made my stomach twist. It didn't sound curious, it sounded personal. But before I could answer, my dad came down from the porch. He put a hand on my shoulder and stepped between us. "Can I help you?" my dad asked, his voice calm but with an edge to it. The man's smile flickered. "Just admiring your decorations," he said. Then, glancing at me, "Your boy's a hard worker." My dad didn't move. "Time to go inside." "Son?" I obeyed. As I turned toward the door, I felt his hand tighten just a little. I looked back one last time, and that's when I saw it. The man's smile was gone. His expression had hardened, eyes cold and sharp, locked on my dad. He stared for a few seconds, then turned and walked away down the street. No wave, no goodbye, just gone. 2 nights later, I woke up to a loud crash outside my window. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your mind even wakes up. Something heavy had fallen in the front yard. My room was upstairs, facing the street, and through the blinds I could see the pale orange glow of the streetlight stretching long shadows across the lawn. That's when I saw him. The same man from before. He was standing halfway behind the oak tree, motionless, just watching our house, my breath caught in my throat. The scarecrow my dad had set up was lying flat on the grass, and I knew that sound had been him knocking it over. He wasn't moving, just staring straight up at the windows, like he was trying to figure out which one was mine. When his head tilted slightly upward, I felt a cold wave rush through my chest. I ducked down fast, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a few seconds, I just sat there frozen, too scared to breathe. Then I ran. I bolted down the stairs and found my dad still awake, watching TV. I could barely speak, but the words finally came out. "Dad, that man is in our yard." He was on his feet in seconds, grabbing the flashlight from the table and heading for the door. I stood by the hallway as he stepped outside, scanning the yard, the street, the shadows. A full minute passed before he came back in and locked the door behind him. "There's no one out there," he said quietly, but I could see the tension in his face. The scarecrow just fell. Maybe it was the wind. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I saw. The wind doesn't stare back at you. The next morning was October 31st, Halloween. Even though I was still uneasy, excitement started to win over fear. All day at school, I kept thinking about costumes, candy, and the smell of pumpkin candles. After class, James and Curlis came by and we changed. I was a ninja in all black, James was a werewolf, and Curlis a vampire with fake blood and a red cape. When the sky turned orange, we grabbed our candy bags and ran out the door. At first, everything was perfect. Kids were laughing, parents waved from porches, and each house gave us more candy than the last. But as the night went on, we started chasing the good candy. We went farther, block after block, until the streets looked different, darker. The houses here had no lights, no decorations, just silence and wind. Then we saw a small house with one lonely pumpkin glowing on the porch. As we walked closer, a voice called out from the shadows across the street. "Hey kids, over here! I've got the good stuff." We turned and my blood went cold. It was him, the same man. He stood in a dark driveway holding a big bowl, that fake smile stretched too wide on his face. "Come on, don't be shy," he said, trying to sound friendly. Curly and I took one step toward him, but James grabbed our arms. "No," he said sharply. "Don't. We need to go." His voice shook. The man's smile dropped. He tossed the bowl and it hit the ground with a hollow sound. It was empty. Then he started walking toward us, fast. "Run!" James yelled, and we did. Our bags bounced, candy spilled, and my heart felt like it would burst. I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement behind me, closer with every step. Curlis darted between two houses and vanished into the dark. James was ahead, shouting for me to hurry. I looked back and the man's face twisted with anger. His eyes locked on me. I could hear him breathing, rough and furious. My costume felt heavy, slowing me down. Then I felt it. His hand grabbing my back. I screamed, "Get away from my son!" My dad's voice tore through the night. He came running from the side street, flashlight in one hand, rage burning in his eyes. The man froze, then let go of me so fast I fell to the ground. He stared at my dad, silent, then turned and sprinted away into the dark. My dad pulled me up and hugged me tight. His hands were shaking. A few moments later, James came back, gasping for air, and Curlis peeked out from behind a fence. None of us said a word. We just stood there under the cold streetlight, breathing hard, realizing that Halloween night had almost become something much darker. My dad told me later that he started to panic when we didn't come home on time. He had called James's house, but no one answered. That's when he grabbed his car keys and drove out into the night to look for us. He said he stopped by one of our neighbors' houses, asking if they'd seen 3 kids dressed like a ninja, a vampire, and a werewolf. Luckily, they had, and they told him which direction we went. That was how he found us. If they hadn't seen us that night, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. We never saw that man again, but his face still haunts me every Halloween. What was supposed to be a night full of candy and laughter turned into something that changed the way I see this holiday forever. Now every time I see a stranger standing too long in the dark, I can't help but wonder, what if he's still out there, watching someone else's kid? Halloween is supposed to be fun, but sometimes real monsters don't wear masks. Have you ever had something truly scary happen on Halloween night? My name's Mark, I'm 17, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago. The kind of place where everyone waves when they drive by and nothing bad ever seems to happen. That Halloween night, our neighbor Mr. Taylor was throwing a small get-together. He's an older guy, retired, always friendly, and known for giving out the best candy on the block. My parents said it was fine if I went, since I didn't really have any big plans anyway. That's where I met Jake. He said he was 19, some kind of distant relative of Mr. Taylor's. From the moment we started talking, he seemed chill, tall, short brown hair, plain hoodie, jeans. We started chatting about video games, and when he mentioned he was into Call of Duty, I laughed. Same here. Before long, we were playing a quick round on Mr. Taylor's old console, talking trash and cracking up at how bad the graphics were. Jake told me he lived a few towns over, but visited Mr. Taylor sometimes. He seemed normal, fun even. We traded numbers before I left, and I remember thinking he could actually be a solid friend. A little later, my mom asked me to grab a pumpkin for the porch since my dad was still stuck at the office working late again. When I mentioned it to Jake, he smiled. "I know a great spot," he said. "There's this farm out on Country Road 47, huge pumpkins, super cheap." I didn't see any reason to say no. It was still early evening, around 6, and the sun was barely setting, so I grabbed the keys to my mom's old Ford and we headed out. As we drove past the last rows of houses, the streetlights faded behind us, and the open road ahead turned darker, quieter, in that way that only Halloween night can. No streetlights out there, just open fields swallowed by fog and trees stretching like dark fingers into the night. The air grew colder as we drove, and a heavy mist began to roll across the road, thick and pale like something alive. My headlights barely cut through it. It felt like we were driving straight into nowhere. Jake kept talking about random things, school, games, his so-called gap year before college. His voice was calm, easy, but something in me stayed tense. Finally, after 20 long minutes, we pulled into what looked like an old farm. A broken wooden sign leaned by the entrance, letters faded but still readable. Miller's Pumpkin Patch. Only there were no lights, no cars, no people, just endless rows of pumpkins, half hidden under the fog. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice lower than I meant. Jake shrugged. "Probably closing up. Hang tight, I'll check around back." He opened his door and disappeared into the mist. The silence left behind was heavy, pressing against the windows. I scrolled through my phone to distract myself, but there was no signal. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The longer I waited, the louder my heartbeat sounded. I started thinking of calling my mom, but the screen just spun. No bars. That's when I saw movement. Jake came back, but he wasn't alone. Another man walked beside him. He looked like a farmer. Late 40s, clean-shaven, overalls, flannel shirt. But his smile was too wide, stretched in a way that made my stomach twist. "Hey there, kid," he said, voice low and rough. "Jake here says you're looking for a pumpkin. Come on inside. I've got the best ones in the barn." I looked toward the barn behind the field. It was old, wooden, with doors that creaked back and forth in the wind. Jake gave me a small nod. "Yeah, Mark, let's go. He says the big ones are stored in there." The farmer smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. He started talking as we walked, asking weird questions. "You live around here? What's your family's name? You got brothers or sisters? What's your dad do for a living?" I tried to answer casually, but my words came out thin. Why did he need to know that? And why were we going inside when the pumpkins were right here in the open field? My eyes darted toward Jake for reassurance, but he just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I froze. Then, somewhere behind the barn, a door slammed. It echoed through the fog like a gunshot. I jumped. The farmer stopped smiling. "Come on, it's just inside," he said again, his voice sharper now. My gut screamed no. I shook my head. "Actually, my mom just texted me. She's waiting. We should go." I held up my phone even though it was dead, pretending to read a message. Jake looked at the farmer, and for a second their eyes met. Something silent passed between them. A chill ran through me. Then, after what felt like forever, the farmer sighed and shrugged. "Sure, kid. Take your pick." I grabbed a pumpkin from the edge of the field, first one I could reach. Jake helped me load it into the truck and we drove off. The silence in the car was thick. Jake wasn't talking anymore. No jokes, no laughs, nothing. When I dropped him off at Mr. Taylor's, he just muttered, "See you around," and walked away without looking back. At home, Mom and I carved the pumpkin like nothing happened. But that fog, that barn, that smile, it stayed in my head all night. Later that evening, I had a few friends over. Just a small Halloween hangout, pizza, soda, a couple of old horror movies. There were 8 of us total. I even invited Jake, since he seemed like a decent guy earlier and I didn't want to judge him too hard. He showed up around 8, blending in like nothing weird had ever happened. We laughed, told ghost stories, and for a moment I forgot all about the farm. But then Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, mumbled something like, "Be right back," and slipped outside. I didn't think much of it until 5 minutes later when the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting a late trick-or-treater, maybe a kid in costume, but it wasn't a kid. It was a man. Tall, wearing a black jacket and a mask that looked almost human. One of those hyper-realistic silicone ones. The mouth was frozen in a grin, the eyes blank. Sorry, private party," I said, blocking the doorway. He didn't move. Behind me, my friends started to notice. Ben and Leah came up beside me. "Hey man, this is invite only. You know someone here?" No answer. The man reached into his jacket. For a second, I thought it was a joke. But then he pulled out a gun. A real one. Cold metal gleaming under the porch light. "Everyone," he said, voice low but sharp. "Wallets, phones, jewelry, now." He tossed a duffel bag on the floor. "Put everything in." My stomach dropped. We froze, then scrambled. Phones, watches, cash, whatever we had. The guy's hand never shook. He moved fast, sweeping the gun across the room. I glanced at Jake. He was in the corner. Calm. Too calm. He dropped his wallet into the bag like everyone else, but his face didn't change. He wasn't scared. The man grabbed the bag and ran out the door, disappearing into the door. We locked everything up and called 911. Within minutes, flashing lights lit up the street. The cops took statements, checked our outdoor camera, the one my dad had installed last year. When they played back the footage, my blood went cold. It showed Jake outside, before the break-in. He was talking to the masked man, without the mask on. They stood close, whispering. Then Jake went back inside. The man waited, watching through the window. It was all planned. The cops arrested Jake that night. He didn't fight. At the station, he told them everything. The man at the farm was his uncle, Carl, a career criminal. They'd been running scams for months, targeting people through small-town parties, pretending to be friendly to learn where people lived, what they owned. The pumpkin patch wasn't real. It was a front. They used it to meet new victims and gather information. The questions the farmer asked about my family, those weren't random. He wanted details, maybe even a chance to steal my keys or phone. The party was supposed to be the final hit. Jake had given them my address, told them how many people would be there. When the cops raided the farm the next day, it was empty of pumpkins. Instead, they found piles of stolen stuff. Phones, jewelry, even a few guns. They arrested Carl too. The gun he used that night was loaded and unregistered. We got our things back eventually, but something in me didn't go back to normal. I kept thinking about how close it was, how if I'd gone inside that barn, maybe I wouldn't have come out. That Halloween started like any other, with candy and costumes and fake scares, but it ended with the real kind. The kind that stays with you. Every year now, when October rolls around and fog settles over the road, I can't help but remember that night. Because the truth is, some monsters don't need masks. They just need a friendly smile and a story that sounds good enough to believe. Now, I always double-check the doors, lock the windows, and think twice before trusting anyone new. Mr. Taylor said he never suspected a thing about Jake. He felt terrible, like he'd brought danger right into our street. But the truth is, none of us saw it coming. That Halloween changed me. It made me realize the scariest things out there aren't ghosts or monsters. They're people who smile, talk like friends, and make you feel safe until they don't. Sometimes evil doesn't hide in the dark. It stands right next to you, laughing, pretending to belong. Even now, when I drive past an empty farm road or see fog rolling in, I still get that same chill down my spine, wondering what would have happened if I had stepped inside that barn. So tell me, have you ever trusted someone who later gave you a reason to regret it? Share your story in the comments. I read them all, and if you want more true Halloween horror stories like this, keep watching. The next one might make you sleep with the lights on. When I was about 11, every holiday meant one thing: packing up the car and driving 2 hours out of the city to visit my grandparents in rural Ohio. It was a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names, where the biggest excitement was the annual church fair, and where if something strange happened, people just didn't talk about it. My grandparents lived at the very end of a narrow, dead-end street. Their place wasn't fancy, just an old wooden house with a wide porch, the kind that creaked when you walked on it. 2 houses down lived my aunt and uncle, and between them was the one house we all hated walking past, the house where she lived. We never knew her real name. Everyone just called her the Chain Woman. Even saying it gave us chills. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, and broad, like someone who could lift heavy things without breaking a sweat. Around her neck hung thick, rusty logging chains, the kind used to pull tree trunks. They clanked with every step she took. She always wore the same dirty, old-fashioned dresses that looked straight out of the 1950s, and her boots were covered in dried mud. Her gray hair was wild and tangled like she'd been caught in a storm that never ended. I'd see her outside sometimes, usually doing the strangest thing, scrubbing the walls of her house. Not the windows or porch, but the actual walls. She'd stand there with a bucket of soapy water and a hard-bristled brush, scrubbing like she was trying to wash something off that no one else could see. Rain or shine, she did it. The sound of those chains rattling as she worked still sticks in my head, and if we ever got too close, she'd stop, turn toward us, and yell in this deep, raspy voice that sounded like she'd been smoking for 50 years, "You little brats! The devil's coming for you! He's gonna drag you down!" I swear, every time she said it, her voice shook something inside me. We'd freeze for a second, then sprint away laughing, but not because it was funny, because we were scared. The adults always said she was just lonely, that she'd had a hard life, and people in small towns could be eccentric. My mom would say, "Don't bother her, and she won't bother you." But even as a kid, I could tell there was something different about her. Something that didn't feel like loneliness. Every time we had to go from my grandparents' house to my aunt's, we'd have to pass her place. There was no other way. The sidewalk there was cracked and narrow, and her house sat right up against the street. The curtains were always half open, and behind them you could see her shadow moving. Or worse, just standing still, watching. We never walked past alone. We always went in pairs, holding our breath as we hurried by. One time, my older cousin whispered that he heard her muttering something as we passed. Something like, "Burying the sinners!" We laughed about it later to calm our nerves, but deep down, I think every one of us believed she meant it. That Halloween, I was 11. My whole family was at my grandparents' house in that small Ohio town, where every street looked quiet but always felt like something was watching. After dinner, me and my cousins Jake, who was 13, and Sarah, 9, decided to go trick-or-treating. I wore a simple ghost costume, just a white sheet with holes cut out. The night was cold, the streets dark, only a few porch lights flickering here and there. Everything was fine until Jake grinned and said, "Bet you won't go to the chain lady's house." We froze. Anyone knew about her, the strange woman who lived alone between my grandparents' place and my aunt's. Her porch light was never on, her windows always half covered, and her chains clanked whenever she stepped outside, but Jake wouldn't stop. "Come on, don't be chickens. What's she gonna do?" My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to look scared, so I followed. We crept up her walkway, the air thick and heavy, smelling like wet soil and rot. Her garden beds were raised high, packed with fresh dirt that looked newly dug. Sarah hesitated but finally rang the doorbell. At first, nothing. Then, bang! A loud crash from inside. Then another, like doors slamming. We jumped back, but before we could run, the front door creaked open. She stood there, towering over us. Chains around her neck, her dress stained with dark blotches, hair wild and gray, and in her hands she held a severed head. It dangled by the hair, dripping something thick and dark. The skin was pale, almost blue, and the eyes stared right through us. For a second, no one moved. Then we screamed and ran as fast as we could. I tripped on the cracked sidewalk, scraping my knee, but I didn't stop. When we burst into my grandparents' house crying and out of breath, the adults didn't believe us. My dad laughed and said it was probably a Halloween prop. "Serves you right for bothering her," he said. We tried to calm down, but that head didn't look fake. I couldn't stop seeing it. A few weeks later, just after Thanksgiving, we got a call late at night. I heard my mom crying. The next morning, my parents sat me down. "Something happened at your aunt's house," Dad said. "The lady next door attacked her." My aunt had been carrying groceries inside, holding my little cousin in one arm. It was getting dark. She didn't hear anyone behind her until she felt something wrap around her neck. A rope saw, the kind with handles on both ends. The woman yanked it tight and started sawing back and forth. My aunt dropped everything, screaming and kicking at her front door. My uncle heard and ran out with the fireplace poker. He hit the woman over and over until she collapsed. Blood everywhere. The police and ambulance came fast. My aunt survived, but she needed surgery, more than 30 stitches. She still covers the scar with scarves. But that wasn't the end. When the police searched the woman's property, what they found didn't seem real. Under her house, she'd been digging tunnels. Deep, narrow ones, reinforced with wooden beams, running under several nearby homes. That's what she'd been doing all those years in her garden, hauling dirt up and dumping it into her raised beds to hide it. The tunnels led to a small underground room, a shrine. The walls were covered with strange symbols, melted candles, and crosses turned upside down. And inside, the police found jars and bags holding human remains. 3 heads, preserved like trophies. They belonged to missing people from nearby towns. The woman had been living there for decades, alone, slowly losing her mind. The head we saw that Halloween wasn't a decoration, it was real. It belonged to a man who'd been reported missing just a week before. The cops said if we'd stayed a little longer on her porch that night, we might have ended up just like them. After that, the house was torn down and the tunnels were filled in like they never existed. My aunt and uncle moved far away. They couldn't stand sleeping in a place that still felt haunted, even after the danger was gone. My grandparents stayed for a while, but built tall fences around their yard, the kind that makes you feel safe even when you know it's just an illusion. I don't visit that town much anymore, but every so often, when I drive through quiet neighborhoods at night and see a dark window staring back, I think of her. The chain woman. Her rattling chains, her hollow eyes, and the secrets buried beneath her home. And it makes me wonder, how many other people out there are hiding something behind their fences, their walls, their smiles? Maybe that's the scariest part. You never really know who lives next door. What about you? Have you ever had a neighbor who made your skin crawl? Someone who just didn't seem right? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you want more true Halloween horror stories that'll make you double check your locks tonight, keep watching because the next one is even darker.